Hi, this is Wendy from Willow Wanders, and I'm back today with another video in my Mixed Media 101 series. And today I'm going to talk to you about pens. If you like this content, I highly recommend going to the link that is going to be in the description here. And the link is to this content in my Teachable classroom. So I have a Teachable school. It's called Willow Workshops. And I have all of this Mixed Media 101 content contained for free into one classroom on Willow Workshops. And not only does it have the videos, but it has all of the supporting information organized in really good readable content for you. And you can leave comments there, you can ask questions there, you can converse with other people who are also interested in this kind of information, in information sharing, telling what are your favorite pens, what have you found, what have you liked and not liked, how do you like to store pens. I mean, there's just so much information when it comes to pens that it's really important that we all communicate with each other to help each other find the things that really work. If you've seen mixed media art, especially art journaling, you probably have some level of awareness about how much we as mixed media artists like to use pens. And we don't just use pens in our work to write out words or quotes or phrases, but we also use a lot of different pens to make marks on paper. So that's why I'm making an entire video just about pens, because I want to go over what to be looking for when figuring out what pens you like to use. And I also want to go over with you what my favorite pens are in case you need some help deciding what you want to spend money on. So the way that I see pens being used in mixed media is I see a lot of hand lettering, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. I also see a lot of doodling. So let's just say, you stamp out an image like I've done here, you let it dry. This was stamped with acrylic paint. And then I'm just doodling right over the image to add some kind of contrast, some kind of detail. So you're gonna need pens that you love to do that kind of doodling in your work. You may be familiar with things like Zentangling. Zentangling is actually a great complement to mixed media art because you can create messy backgrounds and then you can Zentangle right over them with pens, and it's really meditative. I don't do enough of that in my mixed media art, but I probably should do more of that because it is so relaxing. Botanical line drawing is another very popular subject matter in art and is easily applicable to art journaling. So botanical line drawing is just any kind of really black and white line drawing that you would do on top of mixed media art. So for example, let's say you just, this is going to be really freeform and I wasn't even expecting to do this here, but basically botanical line drawing is just doodling botanicals. And you can get really deep into this subject. It's really fun to do botanical line drawing. And because it's so fun and the themes are so universal and so universally loved, right? Botanicals, who doesn't love leaves and flowers? This has become a really big part of any art journaling pretty much that you see out there today. And you can go as loose and as wonky as you want with your botanicals. You can put in as much detail as you want. So you're going to need pens that you really like, that are reliable, that do the things that you want them to do. Okay, what else could you use pens for? You can use pens just to make marks on your papers, whether those papers are outside of a book, like if you're making collage fodder and you're just making a lot of marks on paper. So that would be like you're doing handmade fodder making. Or if you want to just put marks on paper, you're going to want to have your go-to pens. If you can think of other uses for pens, I would love it if you left a comment on this video, because of course maybe there's things I'm not even thinking of. So let's just kind of do a quick review of what I'm aware of people are using pens for, what I use pens for in my mixed media art. So I use pens primarily for hand lettering, and I would say secondarily for doodling, Zentangling like drawing, botanical line drawing. And then I also do a lot of mark making. So you may already be familiar with how popular it is just to make marks, repetitive marks on paper. And this is why mixed media artists typically are gonna have quite a pen collection. Oh yeah. Okay, so let's go over what the things are that you want to look for in your pens, and then what pens are currently my most frequently used pens. So here's what you want to be thinking about. You want to be thinking about versatility. So to me, versatility with pens and mixed media, you're going to want to have pens that are going to write on a lot of surfaces. So with mixed media art, we are often confronted with all variety of porousness levels of paper. So when you have a paper that has a lot of porosity, it's going to easily accept ink. But when you start adding matte mediums to it, and collage, and magazine papers, and all sorts of other types of papers, you're going to start noticing that the pens that you choose to work with are going to have a huge impact on how easy it is to create what you want to create and how much you enjoy working in mixed media. So you're looking for pens that are versatile, that can write on a lot of surfaces, if not all surfaces. That is, I would say, my number one thing that I'm looking for. Okay. The next thing that's on my list, and maybe this list is not in any particular order, but the next thing that's on my list is you want the ink in this pen to not be a major PETA, pain in the blank. You do not want to be fighting with pens as you're trying to write. So an example of fighting with pens does come into play when we talk about this pen in particular, but I'm going to go over how I manage getting a white ink on most surfaces, if not all surfaces, and how I eliminate a lot of the PETA factor of white ink. Okay, so you're looking for pens that the ink is flowing easily, they're not drying out easily. We're also going to talk about storage in this video, because how you store your pens is going to make a difference in how the ink flows and whether or not your pens are drying out. Okay, another factor is how quickly the ink is going to dry when you deposit it on your paper. So for example, and we're going to talk a lot more about these Posca pens, but Posca pens or Posca pens are acrylic ink in a pen, and when they go on your paper, they are going to remain wet for a little bit. So not very long, and that's something that you want to learn about your pens, is how long is the paint going to remain wet? Because when you're working, you want to make sure that you are not smudging the ink if you don't want the ink smudged. So there might be circumstances where you actually want to work with smudging ink. And I'm just going to show you how that might work. So here is an ink that's in a pen that I love. This is my go-to black pen. And maybe I'm going to purposefully Oh, look how quickly that dried. I wasn't actually expecting that. I was expecting that to remain wet a lot longer. So it has to do with the porosity of the surface. So on this surface, this is just some hotel pad that I took home from a hotel I stayed in. This ink stayed, or this, I'm sorry, this ink dried really, really quickly. Now, contrast that with using this same pen on acrylic paint. So I have a lot of collage fodder that is made with acrylic paint as the way of depositing pigment. And when I write with this ink on top of acrylic paint, it takes a really, really, really long time to dry. So long that if I mistakenly put my hand in it, I'm going to totally smudge that ink. But there's also a weird benefit to that, which is you do have some time. I don't have a paper towel here, but you have some time actually, if you make an error, to actually lift that ink. So I'm just going to review that again. So if you were to deposit ink on a surface and it dries immediately, that's really good if your issue is you're trying to avoid running your hand over it and smudging it. But there's a benefit sometimes to having an ink and a surface which is slower drying, because maybe you might want to create an effect where you're moving that ink, or maybe you want to actually leave room that you can correct mistakes before they dry. So it's not like there's a right or wrong pen. There's just kind of an understanding of how your pens work so that you use pens that you really like to use. Not that I really like to use, but that you really like to use, okay? So that's another thing to consider, is drying time of the ink. All right. Another thing to consider is whether or not after the ink is dry, if it is water soluble or not. So if you put down ink and it is not water soluble, that means that if you put down something that's wet on top of it, that it's always going to move. So this here is what's called a Tombow dual brush pen. And I would say that this is your typical marker pen. And as far as I'm aware, this is water soluble. It never dries permanently. So I tend to avoid using pens that do not dry permanently in my mixed media art, because mixed media art is a little bit messy and you tend to use a lot of water, and then what you have is ink that is movable. And if you don't want it to move, you just want to make sure that what you're using to put your marks down with is drying permanently and not drying temporarily. Now, in doing this little experiment, I'm actually realizing that that's actually a phenomenal technique. So using non-permanent markers, but then putting water over them, actually created an effect that I really like. So a lot of it is truly, with mixed media art, it's truly just about play and figuring out what you like. So I like the way these marks look, but I will tell you something. I kind of like the way it looks a lot more once I've kind of pushed those marks into the paper, and it's a lot more interesting, a lot more subtle. It's layering those effects. Now notice when I put the water on here, the black pen that I used, this is my #1 favorite pen. I am going to go over all of these individually, but this ink did not move. Once it's dry, it is permanent. And that is a beautiful thing, because I know that I can rely on this ink to not go anywhere. So that's why I do my lettering in pens that do dry permanently. But I think I might revisit my Tombow Dual brush pens and other markers that are not permanent, because actually I just discovered something that I really, really like. I like how that worked. Okay. All right, so that's durability. And then the last thing to consider is your nibs. So the nib is the material that is used for the tip of the pen. So think about a calligraphy nib. I don't have one right here, but a calligraphy nib is made out of metal. And metal is very, very hard and durable. With pens, you are going to have a variety of materials that are used as the nib material. So something like a marker, which has a very soft material, is not something that you can really like press hard or use this on a surface that has a lot of texture and that's rough like a sandpaper, because you will destroy this nib. And it is actually very easy to destroy the nibs of these Tombow Dual brush pens. And when you use them, you just have to kind of be careful with them that you don't destroy their nibs. It's just something to think about. So and actually I have a really good example of this. Here is my good example of non-usable pens for me, typically when it comes to most mixed media art. Now, there's certain applications where I could use an artist pen, like a Micron or a Pitt artist pen, but when it comes to making marks over highly textured surfaces, I would destroy the nib on here. So if I was just going to be making, let's say, doodled botanicals for fussy cutting on a very smooth or a relatively smooth white paper, sure, I could use a pen like this and I would be fine. But once I start using a pen like this, anywhere where there's texture, you are going to destroy this nib really, really quickly. So where this really comes into effect for me is with the hand lettering. When I'm hand lettering in my mixed media journals, I am writing on all different types of surfaces that do oftentimes have a lot of texture. And so I'm looking for pens that have durable nibs. So I'll show you another example of a great pen with a very durable metal nib. This is the Foodie Ball 1.5. And if you can see this, let's see, if you can see this, it's got this really great metal nib here. And this makes a really thick line for a pen. So I just save this for times when I want a really bold black mark. But what I love about this pen is how easily the ink flows, how it writes on every surface, and how the nib itself is really hard metal. So, okay, that being said, my whole entire explanation of what I'm looking for in pens, now I want to go over with you one by one what I use most frequently and why. Okay, so my first most favorite pen for mixed media journaling, especially for hand lettering, is this pen right here. And this is the Uniball Air Micro. And let's see, you can see how many of these. I don't have to worry with these about having a lot of them going. I have them all over my house. They never dry out. I don't have to worry about how I store them because they just don't dry out. So this is called the Uniball Air Micro. And the only thing that I have to watch out for with this pen is that it has a very, very slow drying time on non-porous surfaces. So the beautiful thing about this pen is that it writes on everything that I have tried. I mean, it probably wouldn't work on glass, but it writes on all the different surfaces that I create. So this is acrylic paint on a piece of paper. And it just so easily writes. The ink is about 99.9% consistently flowing out of this pen. It's not the finest nib size, and there are multiple sizes of this Air Micro pen from Uniball. But for my purposes, it's really great. I just have to be super careful about not running my left hand over it because it will take time to dry. And I just realized as I'm doing this that this is actually matte acrylic paint. So I tried recently to only start buying matte acrylic paints because I do so much work with pens. So this was me writing with the Uniball Air Micro on matte acrylic paint, but it would work just as well on glossy acrylic paint. As you can see in this example, this was totally gloss acrylic paint and it writes over it beautifully. Okay, so this has a very strong nib that does not get destroyed. It dries permanently, like after it's dry. Oh, you saw me run that test with the water right before, but it is permanent. It is not going anywhere. But because there's the slow drying time, if I make a mistake and I quickly get on it, I can actually wipe that ink off with some water and a towel. So that's my number one go-to black pen. My next go-to pen is a little bit controversial, but it is this white pen, and it is the Uniball, again, another Uniball. This is the Uniball Signo. It's the UM-153. Now, every mixed media artist is basically obsessed with finding their white pen that they are going to use in their mixed media art. So another possibility is many people like the Posca pen, so also made by Uniball. They like a Posca pen with a really fine nib. I find Posca pens to be good, but not great overall. So what's really good about Posca pens is it is acrylic paint in an ink pen. And once you, let's see, I need my paintbrush. Once it's dry, I believe it's not going anywhere. Yeah, so that's a beautiful thing. Posca dries permanently. Gotta love that. What's not great about Posca is it's very easy for the ink to just flow out of the nib, like so much that it just deposits a big blob on your paper. So recently I have been turned on to a different kind of paint pen that I do think will rival Posca pens in their popularity. They are made by different companies, and this set here is made by a company called ARRTX. I'm guessing these are manufactured in China. That's my guess. Yeah, made in China. And they, again, there are a couple different brands of this. I can link to all the pens I use in the description to this video, and I'll also tell you different brands of this. But the beauty of this is it is the same paint effect that you get with Posca pens, but instead of it being a nib, you probably want to see this, really, you're probably excited, but instead of being the nib like the Posca where you shake and you have to release the paint into the nib, there's no shaking with this or releasing ink. There's just a continuous flow of paint. So once this dries, we're going to do the water solubility test. If it's wet, it's movable. But the absolute beauty of these is you're going to get the same benefits like you got with the Posca, only you don't have the detriment of the ink being so out of control. So interestingly, the coverage with some of the colors is maybe not as opaque as it is with a Posca, but I kind of like that effect because you can see with Poscas, they are so opaque. And this is both good and bad, but Poscas are wonderful, but they are so opaque that they sit on top of anything that you do, which again, it has its pros and cons. I'm not saying you don't want Poscas, you do. But interestingly, this being a little less opaque has its benefits as well. That is really cool. Oops, I just smudged the Posca. See, it wasn't dry, so I smudged it. I got my hand in it. All right, so let's try another color just for kicks and giggles to see if some of this is more opaque. Yeah, that's a little more opaque. Let's try another one. Oh yeah. Okay, so this color is as opaque as a Posca. See about that? That's as opaque as a Posca. So with these, you just don't know what, you don't know what you're getting. Some of the colors are as opaque as Poscas, other ones are less opaque, but overall, I have to say, I give these pens an A. Okay, so when it comes to paint pens, I can highly recommend these, and obviously I can highly recommend the Poscas. The Poscas come in all different nib sizes, all different colors, whole world out there of Posca pens. Yeah, lot of Posca pen use in mixed media art. Okay, the next, oh, I never finished talking about, I never finished talking about the white pens. All right, so let's go back to the white pens. So the problem with white pens is that the ink in the pen does tend to dry out a lot faster than anyone would ever want it to dry out. And the other issue with white pens is the opacity. So with white pens, most people are looking for a white pen that's super opaque, that does not dry out, and that does not have the issue of the ink just racing into the nib and creating a blob on your paper. So when you think about all the different factors, opacity, ink flow, and manageability essentially of it, I think that the Uniball Signo is the clear winner. But when you use these pens, I think there's some good tips and tricks to know about to make your experience with them a lot better. So this is how I manage using them. I try to have one that is my current usable pen where the ink is not dry and it's really flowing. So what you see here is 5 of them. This is really bad practice. I should just be showing you one of them, okay? And what I should be doing is using this pen until there is no ink left in it whatsoever. Because when this ink dries out, this pen becomes difficult and frustrating and people get very upset with it. So obviously this is not a dry one, but if you just keep one going, maybe you put a piece of washi tape on the end, or you put a little dot of nail polish on it, and you know that that is like your current white pen, your go-to white pen, you're gonna get very consistent results where the ink is flowing. I believe when it dries, you can't move it with water, and it's opaque. If you have a lot of them going, what is gonna happen is that the ink is gonna dry out inside of the cartridge, and you're gonna get very, very frustrated. And no matter what you do, once it's dried out, like once the ink dries in the nib, oh, also this has a really great metal nib, so you can write on pretty much any scratchy surfaces. But once you've got the ink dry in the nib, it's near impossible to get it moving again. Some people will get it moving again by writing actually on their skin. That can help, but usually what I find is once it's dry, it's kind of garbage. So I just try to keep one going and not have 5 going. The other thing about these is the best way to store them is upside down. So having cups in your studio with your pens upside down is definitely more preferable to laying your pens on their side, or God forbid, having them upright like this. You want your pens upside down. And in fact, I have all of these pens that I love, and I'm not storing these upside down, and I should be. So, but it's kind of difficult with these because you don't know what color is in them. Well, some of them you do. Some of them have the color on the end and some don't. Okay, so let's keep going. We're going to talk about more gel pens. So there is a brand of gel pen. It is called Sakura, and they make a pen called the Jelly Rolls. And the Jelly Rolls come in all different sort of flavors of pen. So there's glaze and moonlight and souffle. Here's another moonlight. I'm just picking these out at random to see if we can find moonlight. So there's all these different flavors. There's ones that are iridescent. Let's see, the iridescent ones are maybe called the moonlights. That's what I'm thinking. Oh, this is a glaze. So anyway, so far we found souffle, we found glaze, we found moonlight. There may be others. These pens are extraordinary. And they usually come in sets of 10. You can buy them individually in art stores, so you can pick your colors individually. I bought these in sets on Amazon, I admit it. And the only ones in these sets that I don't really love are actually their white pens. So I don't find that the Jelly Roll white pens are as opaque as the Uniball Signos. But I know there are people who love these and prefer these, and this doesn't look that bad on this surface. It actually looks pretty good. So you could try these. They come in different nib sizes, which is nice. There's an 05, there's a 10. Here's the glaze one, that's the metallic one. I have a feeling that I would not even be able to see this ink. Let's see if I can even get it started. Yeah. Let's see what happens. So these go on really, really wet, but then when they dry more opaque. So you might not be able to see this now, but there is ink deposited there, and let's see what happens. That is the glaze pens. Anyway, there's all these different kinds of these. What I have found overall is just that these are wonderful. I love the colors that they come in, and I love their ability to write on all the different weird surfaces that we write on. So if there's dry matte medium on collage, you can rest assured that these Sakura pens, these Jelly Roll pens, are going to write on it. So whether you want to do botanical line drawing, mark making, or hand lettering, you are going to be able to get ink onto those papers. So these are an awesome, awesome kind of pen that are forever going to be in my mixed media studio. Okay, another type of pen that I touched upon, which is the standard marker type pen, comes in a lot of different brands. It comes in these really popular name brand companies like the Pitt pens, the Faber-Castell Pitt pens. It comes in the Tombow pens, but now there's all sorts of other brands on the market. So I was gifted a set of pens by this company, OHUHU. So these are the water-based markers, meaning once this ink is dry, it's still going to be movable with water, I believe. And these are all good. And while I don't typically use these kinds of pens on top of acrylic paint in a journal, these pens are really great for making collage fodder. So if you want to make what in fodder school we call micro fodder, which is papers that have small little marks, these pens are really wonderful. The downside of them is if you don't fix the ink with a fixative and then you brush wet matte medium over it, I believe what's going to happen is you're going to move those inks. But actually, I'm wrong. Look, they were not movable. Oh no, this one's bleeding. There you go. But actually, that's kind of a cool bleeding effect. So the pit dried permanently. Here's another brand, the Zig Fudabiori. So all of these pens do the same thing, but it's looking like some are drying permanently. Here's the Faber-Castell Artist Pit Pen. Looks like some dry permanently and some remain movable, i.e. water soluble. That moved. So you just have to know your pens, remember, or test out so that you know what you're working with as far as which inks are going to move. Maybe you want them to move. Maybe that's the effect you're trying to cause. But I would classify all of these pens, no matter what the brand, as basically markers. That's how I would classify them. And typically, like I said, I would not be ever writing over acrylic paint, but I would use these pens if I am colorizing fussy cuts. So let's say I have drawn something with black ink on white paper and then I want to go in and colorize it. This brand is Koi. You see there's so many brands that sell these. These are also really good for calligraphy. That's why they're so popular. But if I'm just looking to colorize some fussy cut fodder before cutting it out or even after cutting it out, markers are a great, easy way to go. A lot more controllable than most paint pens, although the new paint pens have the same type of nib technology. So those are also, the new paint pens are going to be wonderful for colorizing fodder. So you can see in the Mixed Media Studio, there's really a place for all of these different kinds of pens. Okay, another alternative for your everyday standard black pens, so it's an alternative to these Uniball Air micro pens, is the Sharpie S Gel. So this is not my go-to pen, but I do know that other people really, really, really love these Sharpie S Gels. So I did want to mention them. I'm sure that they're permanent when dry. They do have a metal nib. And the ink flows really beautifully. They dry instantaneously. So actually, this could be a candidate for the best everyday pen because of how quickly it dries. So the only question that I have is, you know, this was on the poorest paper. How quickly does this dry on, yeah, it also, okay, so it also remains movable on acrylic paint. So, okay, so it's pretty much the same as far as when you write on a surface that's non-porous, it's going to take any pen longer to dry. But this really is, another really good pen to look into just as far as your everyday black ink pen. So that is the Sharpie S Gel. And this is the 1.0. That's got to be the nib size. It has a nice metal nib and would be great for hand lettering, great for mark making, great for botanical line drawing. Like all of these black pens, the artist pens, and Pitt makes them, and Sakura makes them, but these are all good for, your botanical line drawing type stuff. So that's nice. You can use, I mean, you could use any pen for that. You could use a ballpoint pen for that. You're just going to get different line sizes depending on which pen you use, but they all dry permanently. Oopsies. Ooh, got a situation. So you can see that depending on the pen that you choose, you're going to have a different line size. So just things that you want to know and notice about your pens. Okay, I've got one more that I want to actually mention. I know I'm going to forget stuff, but I want to mention another pen category that mixed media artists all over the place are always desperate to solve the mystery of this pen category, and that is the gold, silver, bronze category. Okay, so I have so many different metallic gold, silver, and bronze pens that I have tried out. This is just a small fraction of what I have tried over the years. Sharpies, Art Owl paint marker pens. This is gel somebody. Okay, so many. But most of the time, what people are looking for is what they call like a true metallic. And unfortunately, with a lot of metallic pens, they go on and they look metallic, but once they're dry, you do not get that metallic effect that you're looking for. I was turned on to these pens, which are the extra fine point paint marker from Pilot. They also have the same technology like the Posca pens where you have to depress the nib. When you do depress the nib, you never want to depress and hold. That's going to create a situation where the ink just flows out of the pen. You just want to depress very quickly. But these pens actually are true gold and silver. It remains on the surface instead of just having all of that metallic effect absorbed into the paper. And these are like truly what people are looking for when they say, I want to do pen work in gold and silver. Like you can actually see them. You can see the gold, you can see the silver. They reflect the light. When they're dry, like they're really, really cool. So once again, these are made by Pilot, and they are the gold and the silver marker. I also got these on Amazon. They come in sets. I'll show you that. They come in sets together, and you really get what you want, which is you really get that real true gold look. So super fun find. So far the best gold and silver that I have found on the market. The last thing I want to touch upon is storage of pens. I think when you look for information about pen storage, you're going to find a lot of information about how it's best to store pens on their side. And I've actually been storing pens in special units on my desk, storing them on their side. But I think you could make a case that the best way to store all pens is with the nib side down, because that is going to keep the ink wet within the cartridge that's closest to the nib. It's going to keep the nib from drying out. It's going to keep any air bubbles from settling in here and drying the ink out throughout the pen. So I think if you are thinking about how you're going to store your pens, I would probably recommend storing your pens upside down. And that is how I store a lot of my pens. Not all of them, but I do think in the future, I'm going to try to store all of my pens upside down. So it's kind of difficult when it comes to a pen where you can't tell what the ink color is from the end here. So maybe what I would do in that case is I would try to get some, I would try to get some of this paint on something, maybe a paintbrush, and just get some of that color, there you go, onto the end of that pen, so that if I store it like this in a cup, I'm going to know exactly what pen I'm looking for. All right, so that is an overview of a lot of different pens. Like I think I mentioned in the beginning of this video, there are thousands of different pens out there, and what I've gone over with you is just my favorites. I hope that that was intelligible. I hope that I presented a lot of information that's useful to you about what you should be looking for when you develop your pen collection. If pens are not your thing, then they're not your thing, and that's okay, because mixed media art allows everybody to be themselves. But if pens are your thing and you like botanical line drawing, mark making and hand lettering, Zentangling, if you like those things, you're definitely going to be a pen aficionado. There's always new pens, always new technology. It's always fun to find out something new in the pen market that you didn't know before that could make a great pen for your mixed media art. Like these Artix pens, which I didn't even know about until a few weeks ago. And it got shared with me by my daughter. But, you know, people are sharing information all the time, and it's all really helpful. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and have a wonderful rest of your day.